One evening about 8 years ago, during a heavy downpour, we received a call from an elderly woman. She was terrified, claiming she heard footsteps in her house and believed a ghost was responsible. She often heard someone walking upstairs despite living alone. We went to check it out to ensure everything was okay. She stayed on the line with the 911 operator because she was so frightened. About 3 minutes after she called, she reported seeing a man standing outside in her backyard, staring at her through her sliding glass door. Petrified, she froze and continued to stare directly at him. For the next minute or two, she said he just stood there, completely still, staring back at her. Eventually, the man disappeared. When we arrived about 12 minutes later, I stayed in the foyer with the woman while the other officer checked the backyard. He found no trace of anyone. We decided to do a quick sweep of the house. In her living room, we discovered a trail of mud and footprints inside the house. I asked if she had been outside or had any visitors. She said no, she lived alone, and no one had come by. The woman, around 85 with poor eyesight and hearing, had seen the man's reflection and thought he was outside. In reality, he had been standing only a few feet behind her while she was on the phone with 911. Nothing was stolen or out of place. We never found out his intentions. Who knows what could have happened if she hadn't stayed on the line?
It was around 1:30 in the morning when I was dispatched to a traffic accident in a rural town about 20 minutes from the main city in my county. I arrived on the scene with the California Highway Patrol to find an overturned vehicle in an empty canal. There were no signs of the driver or any passengers. At first we thought the driver had fled the scene, but as we examined the canal floor, which was muddy, we noticed there were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. We decided to light up the canal and check both sides, walking along to see if anyone had been ejected from the car. Just as we were about to give up, I stopped and looked over at the CHP officer on the opposite side of the canal. A thought struck me. "Do you think the body might be under the car?" I asked. I angled my flashlight down into the canal and caught sight of the bottom of 2 shoe soles sticking out of the mud. The body of a man was buried in the muck, and if it weren't for his clean shoe soles, I might have missed him entirely. Being a sheriff coroner, it was my responsibility to notify the next of kin. After finding an old address for the man, I set out to deliver the news. Around 3:30 a.m., I arrived at a cluster of trailers at the address. None of the trailers had visible address numbers, so I started walking around, looking for any identifying details or a car I could run through our system. I found a car with paper plates next to a trailer and began to run a check. Suddenly, I heard a voice. "I've been waiting for you." Startled, I turned around and shined my light onto the porch. An elderly Hispanic woman was sitting in a rocking chair, shrouded in the darkness. "I'm sorry, I'm looking for," I began, but she interrupted me, her voice void of emotion. "I know, my son died about 2 hours ago." I confirmed her son's name and asked if anyone had been with him. She shook her head. "No, he was alone. He went to a party and had too much to drink." Curious, I asked how she knew he had passed. She responded, "At 1:30, he came to me while I was sleeping to say goodbye, and that he was sorry. He told me a young cop found him and would be visiting me soon, so I got up and sat on the porch to wait for you." I was stunned. How could she have known? The hair on my arms stood up as I offered my condolences and left. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but it's a story I'll never forget.
I'm sharing a personal story from my time as a military police officer stationed in Fürth, Germany in the 1980s. This one is guaranteed to send chills down your spine. Back in the 1980s, I was stationed in Fürth, Germany, serving as a military police officer. One night, my partner and I received a call about teenagers reportedly running around inside the American high school. We arrived on the scene, and shortly after, 2 other units joined us, making a total of 6 MPs. From our vantage point, we could clearly see someone looking at us from a window on the 3rd floor. We radioed in to our desk sergeant, who instructed us to stand fast until more MPs arrived. As we waited, we saw lights flicker on in several classrooms and spotted at least 2 figures moving around on both the 2nd and 3rd floors. Within minutes, 3 more units arrived, increasing our numbers to 12 MPs, along with 2 MPI investigators and 3 German Polizei. We surrounded the school, ready to contain whatever was inside. My supervisor led a team of 4 MPs into the building, ensuring the basement doors were locked before they began clearing the school floor by floor, classroom by classroom. Those of us outside kept a close watch on the exterior exits. For over an hour, we communicated with the MPs inside via radio, directing them to the rooms where we saw lights turn on or figures staring at us from the windows. It was eerie. One minute, a strange face would be peering down at us, and the next, one of our MPs would appear at the same window, asking if they were getting closer. Our tension grew as we feared someone might come up behind our MP and push them out of the window. The whole situation felt surreal. 2 hours into the search, the oncoming shift supervisor radioed for everyone to clear the building, lock the doors, and return to the station for a debriefing. We gathered in the guard mount room, everyone involved in the incident except the German cops and the MPI investigators. The mid-shift supervisor, who had been stationed in Germany since the mid-60s and again in the 70s, told us something that left us all stunned. He explained that, without fail, at least once a year, cops would go on a phantom ghost chase in that building, and nothing ever came of it. To this day, I wonder if the building is still there and if the haunting continues. It's one of those experiences that stays with you.
Back when I was working as a cop on a military base, I loved working the night shift. Almost every building on the base was alarmed, with alarms tied directly to our desk. We knew the instant they went off. Whenever an alarm activated, we'd close the base, check the building, pull on all the doors, and see if we could get in. If we could, we'd secure the building, checking all the doors and corners. One night, I was on patrol with my partner when we got called to respond to an alarm activation at the elementary school. We arrived, secured the building, and reported that everything was all clear. About 15 to 20 minutes later, the alarm went off again. We returned to find a maintenance door open, leading into a boiler room. After finding nothing, we locked it and left. Another 20 minutes passed, and the alarm went off again. We responded, but all the doors were still locked. My partner and I decided to sit on opposite sides of the school to see if someone was messing with the doors. We watched for any movement, but nothing happened. Just as we were about to leave, the alarm went off again while we were sitting right there. The building custodian arrived, and we began a thorough walkthrough, checking all the classrooms and maintenance rooms. That's when we saw one of the maintenance doors open with the lights on inside. This room was no bigger than a closet. We walked down and looked in. No one was there. What we did find, though, was a wet footprint of a small child's bare foot. It freaked the living hell out of us. No one had reported a missing child, and the entire building was clear and locked up. No one had entered or left, and we had checked every inch of that place. To this day, my partner refuses to go to that school. And let me tell you, schools are really spooky when they're empty.